Good morning and welcome to Puggy's Corner. This morning I'll be talking with Bob Flint, the Executive Director of the Springfield Regional Development Corporation. First of all, Bob, welcome again to Puggy's Corner.
My pleasure, Chief. Always good to be here.
Well, I like to have you here. So, Bob, let's get right into it now. You're representing the Springfield Regional Development Corporation. When did it start, and why was it started, and who started it? And obviously, are they still on the board, the members that started this whole?
Sure. So first thing is, when did it start and why did it start? So SRDC was created in 1992, and in the span of a few months, well, actually, obviously, before that was sort of the seismic shock of the machine tool industry layoffs of the mid to late 80s and the series of events that ended up with Goldman Industrial Group owning the shops, right. J&L closing and being empty, except for the sheet metal end, and Bryant's and Fellows shrinking considerably and employment dropping by a couple of thousand at least. So you had that kind of hangover still going on, and then with a very short period of time you had the abrupt closure of Idle Knot Dairy, which the locals know all too well about. Was a major New England dairy that closed suddenly and had a huge impact on people, not just from an employment point of view, but for other reasons that folks had money invested with that. And so you had that, and then you also had the abrupt FDIC takeover of the First National Bank of Vermont on a Friday afternoon. That's what's now Merchants Bank, but at the time the headquarters for the First National Bank of Vermont was on Main Street where the Department of Labor office is now. That's why that building is called the Bank Block, because you had First National Bank there, and years ago, where the vault is now, you had Vermont National Bank. Right. So Springfield was reeling, and some of the key business people in town, particularly Don Gurney, Rick Bibbins, Doug Priestley, and others, and if I'm forgetting people, my apologies, put their money together and got some other folks, I believe it was 40 or 50 that originally kicked in significant amounts of money. And Al Moulton, who was a legend in economic development in the state of Vermont, a former commissioner of economic development, had retired, but they brought him out of retirement to be the first director of SRDC. Al passed away a couple of years ago, but certainly I had the great honor of knowing him and meeting him, and, right. and now being in this chair of kind of seeing some of the work that he did and trying to strive to emulate that if I can. So you asked about people being on the board and stuff like that. Right. So none of the people I named are still on the board. They're all still members of SRDC. Don's son, Doug, is now the chair of SRDC and carrying on the family legacy. And obviously folks like Doug and Rick and anybody else, Tom Wallen, are just a phone call away and still are incredibly supportive and helpful to us in our work.
Okay, so we really don't know all the people that were involved, but you had quite a few that...
Well, sure. I mean, and at the time, as you know, I was a broadcaster at WCFR. So Mike Bernhardt, who owned the radio station at that time, was one of those 40 or 50 people. I remember sure. that. I'm sure the Sandersons had to be there. Gene Guy had to be involved with that.
I would imagine.
Lawrence and Wheeler. I mean, I'm trying to think of who the other people
now,
would be.
Was it set up originally just for the Springfield area? Would you know?
I mean, it was set up to try and drive change in economic development in Springfield. And then somewhere after that, I think it was probably 2 to 3 years after that, it broadened its horizons beyond Springfield and was designated by the state of Vermont as one of the 12 regional development corporations, and we still are that. Mm-hmm. So our service area now is 10 towns, basically north to Windsor and west to Ludlow, including Chester and Wethersfield and Cavendish. 6 municipalities within that.
I was just going to ask you, how many representatives you have on the board and how many towns sure. are represented?
Sure. So our board is small. So Doug Gurney is our chair, and obviously from Gurney Brothers Construction here in Springfield. Patty Putnam from Connecticut River Bank is our vice chair. Bill Dakin from Chester is our treasurer. Sharon Combs-Farr from VTEL is on our board. Jason Tom from Von Bargen's Jewelry. Mark Tanny from IVEC. Christy Morris, the Select Board, is an ex officio member to our board from Lovejoy Tool. The Chamber is represented on our board as well. Jen, the new director, is on our board. And I'm missing somebody, but I think I've got most of them. And geographically, those represent different communities as well.
So can you explain to the citizens a little bit about your budget for SRDC?
Sure. So our operating fund budget is roughly $227,000 a year. The largest chunk of that comes from the state of Vermont. As we mentioned, we're one of the 12 designated regional development corporations for the state. Basically, that means that we're their eyes and ears on the ground down here. We're their liaison to businesses, key businesses, as well as helping to redevelop property. So we're kind of a conduit to the products and services, particularly from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and we maintain a strong and regular relationship with them. And so for that, we receive, I think it's $86,000 this year. That's been cut from $110,000 not that long ago. Wow. In the governor's proposed budget, they're proposing to start to build us back to that, but that's been a hit. We downsized because of that a few years ago. So that's the largest chunk of income we receive. We receive funding from 4 communities currently. Springfield is the largest chunk of that at $30,000. That's a number that has probably been that way since 1992. And we'll speak a little bit more about that. Right. Windsor is next. They have increased their funding for us from $12,000 or so up to $25,000 in the current year, and in their FY14 budget, we're slated to be funded again at $25,000. Town of Chester, we receive about $8,500. That's on the ballot as a special appropriation at town meeting. We obviously look for support again, hope for support. And Town of Cavendish pays a $750 fee. Yep. So, generally it works out that the towns that's sort of roughly corresponds to the amount of time we spend in those towns. Sure. Frequently asked question is, on one hand, from a Springfield perspective, well, how can you be focused on Springfield and serve the other towns, and therefore you're not focusing enough on Springfield? Hopefully, folks know me well enough to know that's not an issue, and we'll talk about some of our activities and so forth. And in the other communities, I get, well, geez, you're always focused on Springfield. How are you doing anything for us? Right. And I think we've been very, very active in the region this year. We've had active projects in all the communities. And, the line doesn't, just because there's a town line it stops, doesn't mean that something that happens in Springfield does not economically impact Chester or Baltimore or Wethersfield, and vice versa. Right. So we're all kind of in this together. Yeah. And the better off the region is economically is the better off any or all the communities are. Yeah.
Now, you just mentioned the fact that the Springfield portion is $30,000 a year. Right. And that's really what we're going to talk about this morning. That $30,000 up until this year was put in the capital budget on the town budget. But this year, somebody noticed in the charter, I guess, that you have to go on a special appropriations.
Basically, yeah. So we won't debate the language there, but there was a concern expressed about how the charter read in terms of how organizations like us in Springfield on the Move can or should be funded. The board voted in a 3-2 vote to have us both appear as special appropriations at town meeting. First time ever for SRDC, and we obviously hope the people of Springfield realize the work we're doing, and we ask for their support.
Yeah, the citizens should realize, and we're going to get into that in a very few minutes, what you've accomplished here in this area, and to have it taken out of the budget and put onto a special appropriation, I think is a misguided.
Well, it is what it is, and we're looking for support at town meeting, and then we'll deal with it next budget season. But
yeah, certainly the citizens have got to realize that you need their support, and they need your support. So it's a two-way street.
Sure.
And so that's what we want to really come across.
Yeah. No, I think the important thing is that in a town the size of Springfield, with the grand list, which really is the revenue that provides the ability to fund police, fire, library, parks, and rec, and town government, would seem like it's in the public interest to want to drive the revenues to the town and drive that grand list so you have the ability to provide services.
Absolutely.
And it would seem that the concept of having community development as an essential government function, just as it is on the state and national level, should be a community level as well. So, but again, we've had a strong relationship with the town manager and with the select board, and look for the townspeople's support at town meeting.
Does SRDC pay taxes at all on any of the property you have?
We do. We own 3 properties in Springfield. We own, and again, we talked about the former shops, and that legacy, unfortunately, now is kind of the hangover of the big buildings. So one of SRDC's early projects, so to answer your question, then we can go back, is yes, we own J&L 1, J&L 2, which is now called the Robert S. Jones Center, and Bob Jones is somebody who was instrumental in the beginnings of SRDC as well, and Doug Richards, God rest their souls.
Yep.
And we also own the Bryant Grinder building across the street. So SRDC pays taxes on J&L, Bryant's, and the Jones Center. We pay about $58,000 and change a year in property taxes, so almost double what we receive in income from the town.
Wow. See, the people got to know that, you're not just out there trying to get business, but you also own it, and
Well,
you're
sure.
also paying taxes just like the rest of them.
Right.
So, $58,000 is not just a lot of small change. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of the accomplishments that SRDC has done since its inception.
Right, so I started about that with what we now call the Jones Center. So, and that's as you drive out Clinton Street towards the interstate on the left-hand side, the kind of pinkish building. 3 businesses are in there: Precision Contract Manufacturing, M.E. Baker, and J&L Metrology. And so SRDC purchased that property in the mid-90s, put a significant amount of resources in that, and there was a broader deal that involved the property to the south of that, which would be the old Terminal Railway building and the old salt shed, which, I mean, you and I know, and many watching know, but those were eyesores in the town, and obviously your entryway into Springfield. So, and this was an Al Moulton project. So, in no particular order, SRDC acquired and redeveloped what's now the Jones Center, tore down the Terminal Railway and salt shed building, developed property that originally, well, still owned by Grapponi, but originally was the Grapponi equipment home. Nortrax is now the tenant there, but Grapponi still owns the property. And the Jones Center, after a lot of fits and starts and kind of fingernail biting, is now a stable, successful building and the home to 3 successful businesses. So, that was not easy, but that changed that part of Springfield, and we're hoping to do the same thing with J&L and Bryant's, which we can talk about. Other kind of big things, we mentioned Idlenaut being one of the kind of motivating factors for the creation of SRDC. The Idlenaut property now is the home of Black River Produce, which was an SRDC project. But before that, and shortly after Al started, after, again, the abrupt closure of Idlenaut, Vermont Country Foods, which was an emerging business at the time, needed space, and SRDC facilitated their acquisition of that property, renovations, and allowed them to set up shop in the building. And we did the same thing when they were ready to sell, and Black River Produce needed to grow from Cavendish and expand. Black River Produce pops up again recently because, hopefully, as people know, they have purchased the former Ben & Jerry's building up in the industrial park, which had been empty for several years and really in tough shape, and the town actually headed it. They owned it after tax sale. Black River Produce has now purchased that building, put a significant amount of resources into it, and it's about to open as a meat processing facility. So it's kind of interesting about Black River Produce as a company that started as 2 guys distributing vegetables from a VW van that's grown to be this large produce distributor that now also does seafoods and is now also doing meats.
Yeah.
And they've been wonderful corporate citizens as well.
Big employer, too.
Absolutely. And, getting bigger.
Yep.
So, in terms of, while we're in the industrial park, when Goldman closed in 2002, they left behind 800,000 feet of available real estate. The biggest chunk of that was the North Springfield Fellows property, the last of the shop buildings to be built. And thank goodness the bank that held the mortgage to that paid for oil, paid to heat the building, paid to keep it in repair, because otherwise that would have fallen apart just like J&L and Bryant's.
Sure.
But they didn't. They kept up. So in 2006, when, to be honest, most of the buyers that were kind of kicking the tires on that wanted to tear down the building for scrap steel. There was one in particular that was seriously considering purchasing it. We had the good fortune of working with Winstanley Enterprises and Adam Winstanley and his family, who already had developed property down in the Brattleboro area. And we worked with them to purchase the building. They subsequently have put $10 million into that facility. That has become the home for acrylic design, and Kiosco, both local companies that needed to grow and expand. That in turn led to Kiosco's property being purchased by Lucas Industries, which needed to grow and expand. In all these cases, this also helped keep those businesses in Springfield, because there was some threats with some of those that we might not be able to. That in turn allowed the town of Springfield to buy Lucas's building, the former J&L Technical building next to GoGo Gas, as the new police station. So it's kind of an interesting series of dominoes to coordinate, and that was one of ours. And then kind of the piece de resistance was that Jeld-Wen, which already had and still has a facility in Ludlow, was looking at a major expansion somewhere in the northeastern U.S. So SRDC worked with Adam Winstanley and his team, with the state of Vermont, and with Jeld-Wen, and ultimately we were successful over Nashua, New Hampshire, in acquiring the Jeld-Wen facility in what's now called 36 Precision Drive, which is a major employer in this community.
Right.
So in all those cases, that means having relationships with the businesses, as well as with the property developers, and figuring out how to make the puzzle pieces come together. And the town of Springfield is a huge part of all of this too,
Oh, yeah.
as well as the state.
Yeah. Now, how about 100 River Street?
Sure, that's been our adventure this past few years. So we just talked about new fellows,
Yeah.
now we're talking about old fellows, which is the big brick iconic building by the river. So that has, as you know, and hopefully most folks know, completed a multi-million-dollar redevelopment. That's now the home of the Springfield Medical Center, Springfield Health Center, as well as a branch of Springfield Pharmacy, and a cafe has also signed a lease recently, and they will be starting construction and hope to be open by May. The Great Hall has been an amazing story in and of itself, with gorgeous artwork that's drawn attention from the Northeast. There's a small corner that we sort of are now calling the History Corner, and Don Whitney and Henry Swazinski, and folks you and I both know, have been spending time there and bringing some of the archival materials from the history of this community and the history of the machine tool industry, and are helping to educate people about what you and I take for granted, but a lot of people don't know, and trying to honor the legacy of Springfield and the shop. So we have been involved in that project for, oh goodness, 7 years, 6 years.
6 years. And
you know, that's a historic preservation project. It's in a designated downtown. It's a high wire act in terms of financing. And then it's a brownfields project, so there's contamination that had to be dealt with. We've actively coordinated and put that all together, and kept the developers around who could have bailed any number of which ways till Sunday. They've been coming to Springfield on a pretty much weekly basis for the past 6 years. I still talk to them pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day.
Wow.
And because the project's not done, there's still space to rent and still things to do. But it was heartening to see the transformation in that building, and to see it actually open, whether it was getting the bridge put in place right before Irene, or the demolition that's taking place, or the renovations inside. It's really taken a building that means a lot to this town and kind of bringing it back to the life it should have.
Okay. Now, is there any other buildings in town that you've been involved with in this town here?
Well, I mean, buildings were sort of running out of the big building projects, but certainly there are major projects. I mean, we talk about Black River Produce, we didn't talk about their solar project that they've just completed. IVEC is a business we've worked very closely with. They have a very large solar project as well that opened about 1.5 years ago. They've also expanded a few times, and they have a property ready for a potential additional expansion down the line. In both of those cases, particularly the IVEC one, we were able to communicate with the state and kind of work through some of the regulatory quirks that were potentially delaying the issue, and kind of keep people talking to each other and find solutions. I mean, a common question is, well, how many jobs have you created? We don't create any jobs. Businesses create jobs. But we've got to help businesses be in positions to create jobs. And that can mean any number of things, but it's important that we have the credibility and the trust of businesses to talk to us and be honest with us, and share confidential details, and to have us try and match-make resources to them. So for example, yesterday, I met with 3 businesses in this community, and all 3 in some form or another are planning growth. Probably onesie, twosie in a couple cases, but in another case maybe a little more than that. So Yeah, we got to find the people to work there. We've got to find what training needs are there. There are resources available to provide training support. We're in a building, the Howard Dean Center, that does do education and training. And how do we, again, puzzle pieces, how do we put all that together in a manner that allows the company to do business, be successful, hire people, and not have to waste a lot of time with people that aren't going to help them, that the people come in with the skills that they need, so again, they can do business and grow.
Would you know, Bob, offhand, I hadn't talked to you about this before, but all the businesses that you've helped or supported in some way, how many jobs do you think that created?
I'm not going to go there. I mean, just take 36 Precision Drive as an example. That's a building that was empty for 4 years. It now houses, between those 3 companies, 200 to 300 jobs.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So,
see, people should realize this. And if you add that all together, I bet you've contributed to about 1,000 jobs.
Yeah, probably. I mean, when you over the years, certainly for SRDC, yeah. So, but again, we didn't create them. The businesses create the jobs.
No, but you helped in some way.
Right.
In getting that here, and people got to realize that.
Right.
Now, how about some of the other towns close to us that you've some projects that you've done that actually helps Springfield?
Well, sure. I mean, I think anything we do in any other community helps the region. So whether it's helping Newsbank in Chester, which is a large regional employer, is certainly important to Springfield.
Right.
Whether it's working on the biomass project, which is a large regional project that SRDC supports, or whether it's even working in Windsor. Our big project there this year was building a building that's the home of Vermont farmstead cheese. That's just opened up. Or and we own that building, but another building's about to open that's going to have American crafted spirits in it, which will make vodka. That's a person who was looking at doing that project in another part of Vermont. That person's father knew Don Gurney and was a certain affinity for this area, and they ended up doing the project in Windsor in our region. So it's always funny how the dots connect.
Absolutely, absolutely. So overall, really, SRDC has contributed to a lot of jobs created from what you've done to help either support or get them grants or whatever.
Sure, and putting properties back in play too. I mean, we talked about the tax revenue we do, but in the case of 100 River Street, that's a building that had not been on the grand list in at least 25 years, this year is now paying taxes.
Yeah.
So, that's the object of the game, is job creation and retention, which we can appreciate in this town, but also grand list growth. So hopefully the roadmap we had on 100 River Street is what we can follow and learn from as we do J&L and Bryant's. And while those properties pay taxes now, they don't pay what they should or would or could if they were properly developed and occupied. So that's our job, is to get those to that point.
Looking in your crystal ball there, Bob, what do you see for the future of Springfield as far as growth?
So a couple thoughts. One piece we didn't mention in terms of stuff we've been involved in, but that's a real important building block for going forward, is VTEL.
Right.
So everybody sees the trucks running around and knows that they're hooking up fiber. We've provided space for one of those subcontractors down in the Bryant's parking lot for the past year and a half. But I don't know if folks in the immediate region, in the Springfield region, realize how lucky they are to, first of all, have had a company like VTEL, which has been way ahead of the curve on internet and broadband. I mean, Springfield had the highest DSL penetration in the country over any city or over anything for years, because everybody else had to catch up.
Right.
So the big piece of what VTEL is doing statewide is expanding broadband access to the whole state, mostly through wireless, which is cool and is wonderful. But what they're doing as a part of that for their catchment area, which includes Springfield, Chester, is running high capacity fiber to every single building.
That's right.
Every home, every business. So once again, we're going to have faster speeds than most of the rest of the world, for goodness sake. And they can do custom technological solutions as well. So we've worked closely with VTEL in acquiring these grants and partnering on a variety of things, and are working actively with VTEL staff on how do we leverage that capacity to help drive occupancy in any of these buildings. whether it's the Dufresne Henry buildings, which we haven't talked about, or 100 River Street, or eventually J&L and Bryant's. And if you go to SRDC's Facebook page, there's a whole lot of information about things, but amongst there is videos that we've produced for the 100 River Street project intended for an audience outside of this region. And in one of those showcases VTEL's capacity in terms of the 100 River Street building, just trying to pitch that, hey, you can come to Springfield, you can have your Vermont quality of life, and you can connect to the world from here. So when we talk about crystal balls, I think it's going to be trying to leverage that, trying to regrow the white-collar population that we really lost in the 80s. It's trying to have a mixture of jobs so we can get folks back to work who aren't working, so we can upgrade the skills of those that are working, and we can gradually start to build things back up. And I think a challenge and a responsibility I and SRDC have is, as these sites get cleaned up, and we should talk about J&L here in a second, because that's sort of the elephant in the room, but to talk about how complicated it is, I think our responsibility is to make sure those properties are used for uses that are positive for the community.
Right.
If Bryant's or J&L end up being a giant warehouse with 2 people working there, we've failed.
Yeah.
Now, I will say on the positive side, those properties are eminently marketable. They're on a 4-lane highway near an interstate. And I am extremely confident we could fill those with value-added jobs that will be positive for the community and its residents. But it's, they're both high-wire acts, particularly J&L.
Oh, yeah. Now, do you actually, SRDC, help to secure grants and monies for these businesses that want to move in? Is that part of your job?
Sure. We talked about earlier that we are a conduit for products and services for the state. So without getting into the weeds too much, I mean, that includes the main state incentive program, which is called the Vermont Employment Growth Incentive. Those are, certain kinds of businesses are eligible, and there are certain situations that qualify for that. But that's the state's main incentive. There's financing available through VEDA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority. There's job training monies available through several pots, but 2 main ones, the Vermont Training Program and what's called the WET Fund, Workforce Education and Training Fund. And then there's other pieces down there. There aren't a lot of grants for businesses per se, but there are incentives and pieces to help them expand and grow or come to Vermont.
Now, you alluded to a couple of pieces of property. I don't ask you,
Sure.
I'm not asking you who or whatever, but you think there's a future for the 2 Dufresne and Henry buildings?
I do, and we're appreciative of the fact that Stantec, who still owns those buildings, are keeping them up. That's critical.
Right.
So, we continue to maintain relationships with the broker who represents that property, and those are something that would be suited for a nice high-end office use.
Okay, but maybe in the wings you get some prospective people?
I think it's timing and circumstance. So, yes, I do is the answer to your question, but again, 75 cents you get a cup of coffee too.
Sure.
I don't have anything ready to go. I guess one thing I want to mention too is that besides myself, we have a staff of 3 full-time equivalents that work in our office. We're not a big office.
No.
But besides our staff, we also, again, in that kind of conduit of services and products from the state, we have within our office a small business development center. So if there's someone looking to start a business, or there's a small business that's having some problems, there are free services available to them. There is a local business that through that has, we've helped get a key piece of equipment recently and kind of facilitated a solution to a problem they were having. So Deb Boudrio is our SBDC counselor. PTAC, which in English means contracting with the government. Several businesses make things that the government, whether it's the state or federal government, want to buy. How do they get through the nonsense and the bureaucracy to actually potentially make the sale? We have someone in our office that specializes in that. We also provide space for the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center, and that's someone I was with yesterday, actually. That, again, really focuses primarily on manufacturing and trying to solve problems and match-make resources.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of arrows in the quiver that we can bring to a situation.
So it looks, to me, it sounds like it looks fairly bright for the future of Springfield in the coming years.
I think so. I mean, sort of my stock answer is we're getting there. And I remember what was, and I know what I want to be.
Right.
And we're better than we were, but we've got a long way to go, and I am in no way, I'm humbled by the work that still has to be done,
Yeah.
and committed to try and do it.
Now, you mentioned about J&L and some of the brownfield. So we're going to talk about the brownfield, and if you could explain to the citizens, because a lot of them don't understand what brownfield
Sure,
is, and
sure.
they don't understand what created the brownfield, and they don't know what it's going to take to resolve or solve the brownfield. So if you could really go in depth, Bob, on what we're dealing with.
So we've got a handy-dandy visual aid, which see if it's on camera.
Yeah, if we get this shown.
So that's a picture of, there it is, okay. Sorry for turning my head. So that's a picture of J&L Plant 1. To orient you, Clinton Street is on the left, the river is on the right. And so the rec center would be out of the shot up to the top and so forth. So there's kind of two main issues on J&L. One is historic preservation. For whatever reason, there's a desire on the part of the Division of Historic Preservation to keep the building. So you'll see, as you look at this drawing, references to A, B, and C. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but the quick version is, at the moment, SRDC only has permission to tear down Section C, which is kind of, yeah. So if you were to, as you're driving by the building, there's a little notch in the building kind of across from the gas station. The line between B and C is that notch. So we could tear down from that notch down to the metal building, which is separately owned, what I would call the NBC Solid Surfaces building. And we could also square off some of the stuff on the back. At the moment, the agreement calls for maintaining the rest of the building for 5 years from that point, and ultimately keeping for in perpetuity and restoring Section A, which is the old office building, and the end of the building towards the rec center. We are in the process of revisiting that agreement, and premature to speculate, but I think we'll have ultimately permission to do more. So the different colors on the map represent the non-asbestos and lead pollutants on the property. So one of the things that distinguishes J&L, unfortunately, from the other shop buildings is it's the most polluted. So brownfield is the term, as opposed to greenfield. Your lawn is a greenfield, or pristine property. Farmland is a greenfield. Brownfield is the opposite. In other words, brownfield is contaminated property. It's a distinction that's not nearly as severe as, say, a Superfund site or something like that, of which we have one in town.
Sure.
That's a whole other thing. Brownfield is thankfully more dealable than that. But within brownfields, J&L is complicated, both in terms of magnitude and the different types of contaminants. Simply put, solvents and oils that were used in the manufacturing process contribute towards, that are still there, whether it's in the cement or in the soil, or even asbestos that's on the pipes and in the windows and all this other stuff. We thought we were going to be able to, if we were going to save the office part, Section A, we spent some funds this past year on asbestos cleanup, believing that was the extent of the asbestos cleanup. It turns out it was a drop in the bucket. And we're going to have to redo the asbestos assessment of the property, and there's a walkthrough actually next week about that. So on the positive side, if the camera could go back to the drawing and go to kind of the right side of the building where you see some blue and orange dots, and you'll see I've got a bunch of stuff highlighted in green. There we go.
You got it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so the area to the right is the former chip shed area. So many years ago, a railroad used to come right along the river and pick up and drop off materials, and the metals were chipped. All these buildings have chip sheds.
Yeah.
That's probably the most contaminated part of J&L. It's also near the river. Thankfully, knock on something, the river has not been impacted by J&L or Bryant's. But it's a little too close for comfort. So we've received $600,000 in funding, $400,000 through an EPA grant to the Southern Windsor County Regional Planning Commission, $200,000 to us that we applied for and received. And tearing down that chip shed and digging up those soils is work that will be done this next spring, summer. It's going to go out to bid sometime in the month of March. So the downside is you're not going to see that from the road, but it is a significant amount of work that's going to be taking place and getting rid of some of the nastiest stuff. If we can pull back out on that picture and go back to it again, kind of going left from that that we were just looking at towards the road side of that section of the building, you'll see in the middle of section C, or upper middle, there's an orange and red dot, and then interfacing with that is a very faint yellow circle.
Yep.
That's kind of faded a little bit, and if it were to zoom in, you may be able to see that. So why haven't we torn down any of J&L? It's because of that yellow area, which is coal tar that is going allegedly from what's now the gas station across the street, but many years ago was a manufactured gas plant. And that is apparently going from that property underground onto and under J&L.
Uh-huh.
So I'm being careful, but that's resulted in litigation. The state of Vermont has an enforcement action against the owners of that property. Mm-hmm. The owners of that property have sued a whole bunch of folks, including us in the town. I think everybody's out of the suit now except us and Bradford and the state. I think the town is out, which is a good thing for the town.
Right.
But until that suit is resolved, or until that whatever's going on is resolved, we're stalemated in terms of being able to do anything with that part of the building, which is unfortunate. There are days when I think that'll be resolved today, and there are days when I think it could be years. So that's what lawyers are for.
That's right.
So, but we can get off the drawing now. But just to give an idea, what you just saw on the map and the asbestos ultimately is probably a $2 to $3 million cleanup.
Yep.
So the vision is that we would continue to acquire funds to do the cleanup. At some point, we would partner, similar to what happened on 100 River Street, with a commercial developer and do a lease to purchase. Ultimately, I think J&L, most, if not all of it, is torn down. Remember, the building hasn't been heated in over 20 years.
Yeah.
It's horrific inside. I wouldn't let anybody watching inside the building. It's not safe.
Yeah.
It's very sad and very tragic.
Yeah.
But it's a flat piece of property on a 4-lane highway near an interstate. We can market it. Bryant's we won't spend a lot of time on, but Bryant's is sort of at the beginning stages of the assessment process. So the good news is, again, knock on wood, the extent of contamination in Bryant's is not nearly of the magnitude of J&L. It's maybe more analogous to what's now 100 River Street. So that's good news, but that's still got to wend its way through the process. So we're trying to do that. We've done some structural engineering work. We'll be doing some roof work to shore it up, and I think you'll see us chip away. I think most of that building will survive. We may tear down a small part of it, but we're trying to determine that. And that will be redeveloped, probably going south to north, because the south end is the best end of that building. But,
yeah, the R&D.
But the previous owner stripped it. All the wiring, everything's gone. So we're starting from scratch. But the building is salvageable, and we'll get there. It's just going to take time.
Yep. Well, that's quite an undertaking, too, especially if it's been stripped of all the wiring and plumbing and everything else. That's good. You're talking millions of dollars to get there.
Well, but we'll get there. You know, and we've got to get there because it doesn't do the town any good to have these buildings sitting there. But I think the sort of misnomer is that, and I think that's why 100 River Street was huge, because you drive by day after day, year after year, and nothing happens. And there's an understandable impression that nothing's happening in Springfield, no woe is us. And 100 River Street took me 6 years, to get it from where it was to where it is. J&L, I've been working on that for 8 years, and it's going to take a few more. But it's tough. But we're going to get it.
You still feel confident that the old J&L building will be occupied sometime?
Well, the building won't, but the site
will.
Yeah, of course it will.
Okay, I'm going to look forward to that.
Well,
I hope in my time, anyway.
Well, and hopefully the success we've had around, and the reputation we have around the state and with our congressional delegation, and we sort of have neglected them, but whether it's Congressman Welch or Senator Sanders or Senator Leahy, we all have very strong relationships with them. We have a strong relationship with Governor Shumlin and his staff. And again, you talk about puzzle pieces. they provide many of those puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Big ones.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that you want to discuss as far as buildings or?
No, I think we've covered everything, and hopefully have given a good overview of what we're doing. I mean, as always, our website is springfielddevelopment.org. Our Facebook page has a lot of great information and pictures on it. I do have a Twitter account too for SRDC, but I'm easy to find, 885-3061. My email is Bob F. That's F as in Flint, Bob F. at springfielddevelopment.org. And happy to talk about what I can talk about. I can't talk about confidential stuff, but I'm pretty open and honest.
Well, Bob, you forgot one thing.
What's that?
How about the sign?
Oh, the sign. My goodness, thank you, Chief, for reminding me of that. So, goodness, Mark would shoot me. So, so we talked about IVEC, and we talked about the North Springfield Industrial Park, and there's a handy-dandy little brochure here. So IVEC owns the property at the corner of Precision Drive and Main Street in North Springfield. Many years ago, there was a wooden sign there that showed who the tenants of the park were and showed you where they were and stuff. That sign fell into disrepair and was not maintained and was torn down a couple of years ago because it was basically outdated and it was useless. So IVEC has taken the lead, Mark Tanney, on putting up a new sign. The park will be renamed Precision Park, which was its original name, and a variety of local businesses, including Gurney Brothers and Woodbury's and Vermont Timber Works and others, are all contributing their services to making this sign, which is going to have a granite base from Rock of Ages granite, nice timber wood frame around it, and it will list the businesses in the park and help drivers, people who are going there, figure out what's where. But on the base of it will be an opportunity for businesses, not just in the park, but anywhere, to put their logos on and kind of, in Mark's words, send a message that economic activity is alive and well in the Springfield area. SRDC will be responsible for maintaining the sign, and we will receive the proceeds from this project. Within the sign will be a time capsule, so the businesses that sign on to the sign can put something in the time capsule. On the ends will be a place for individuals to put initials. We've sold a little more than half of the business ones now. Wow. And again, God bless Mark for putting his energies into this. He spent an awful lot of time on it, and he's contributing significantly financially to it. And we hope to get this sign in this spring, summer.
Great. I want to make sure we get that.
Yeah, no, thank you for reminding me.
Well, once again, Bob, I want to thank you for coming on. But I want to talk to the citizens for just a second. As you go to the polls, and you see the special appropriations, you're going to see where the $30,000 for SRDC is there. Make sure you check that as a positive vote, because without them, we probably won't see much growth. They have done a tremendous job here in this town. They've done a tremendous job around our town, which contributes to us indirectly, and in some cases directly. So let's support them. The only way we can support them is that you vote yes on that special appropriation of $30,000 for Springfield Regional Development Corporation. I urge each and every one of you to vote yes and support it. And Bob, once again, I wish you the best of luck in the future for getting us new businesses, I hope, and get a lot of people employed so they don't have to leave town. Yep, amen. And then we appreciate your support, obviously, Puggy, and appreciate the consideration by the people of Springfield at town meeting. Once again, thank you, and thank you, citizens, for watching Puggy's Corner.